All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Learning Tech Talks, where we are continuing to live at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Today, I'm looking forward to it. I'm joined by Gavin Lira, who's the founder and CEO of the Empathy Firm. And we're going to be taking a very pragmatic approach to what can you do with AI to improve your overall operations, whether that's you're a business, whether you're a function, whether you're an individual. You're going to walk away from this conversation with some creative ideas of how you can actually go from talking about AI and what's possible to actually doing it and doing it well. So, Gavin, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into everything. You guys got two nerds today. So I'm
Yeah,
excited
well,
for
you
it.
know what? We'll geek out, but we'll hopefully, not hopefully, I will do my very best to make sure that anybody who watches or listens to it is able to actually practically and tangibly go back and go,
Yes.
okay, I have some ideas of what I can do with this. And for those, before we kick it off, if you are not subscribed to my Substack, make sure you do that, because at the end of every one of these later in the week, I post a reflections article with some of the biggest takeaways and actions that you can take from this. So if you don't have time to listen or watch the whole thing, that's probably the best place to get back, or subscribe to YouTube, where I'll share the highlight clips. So with that, Gavin, for folks who may not know you, we got connected through some technology app. I think we were connected through something. And when we connected, I remember being like, the field you're in is not directly related, but the heart of how you do things and the way you think as a technical problem solver was perfect. And I think people are going to see that as we dig into this. But for those who aren't familiar with you, little bit of background into you and the journey you've been on.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll keep this brief because I think the people will, benefit most from all the things that we'll dive into the
From us
specifics.
geeking out. Yeah.
Yeah. Geeking out in a way that's easy to implement and understand, of course. And really, like for me, I grew up in a small town, 6,000 people. Had a pretty normal life, like was very just blessed and fortunate. Like I had the opportunity when I was a junior in high school. I had like $300 and I was like, okay, I'm going to get a job. I'm pretty broke, but then I saw this YouTube video about how to start an online business with $0 down. And I was like, okay, it's 8 minutes. I'm bored. I'm procrastinating my homework. I literally remember I'm in my bed. I click it and it was on drop shipping, which for those of you that aren't familiar is essentially it's e-commerce. And you use a site like AliExpress to buy products in wholesale and you resell them for a profit. But I got into that thinking I'm going to make tens of thousands of dollars in my first few weeks. Ended up losing my $300, but I was a
So
straight A student.
you went in going $300, 8 minutes of my time on YouTube. I'm going to make it big.
Well, yeah, and it took a few weeks, like really diving into everything, following the quote unquote rubric, right? If we're going to compare it to school, because I was a straight A student in school, I never had gotten an F, right?
Okay.
And the marketplace, not even on a test, nothing. The marketplace then gave me the fattest F and it was like, I didn't sell anything. I didn't sell one thing except my mom ended up buying something for like $7 because she felt bad for me. So God bless her soul.
I love it.
But yeah. So either way, essentially fast forward past that. What I learned from that though is I went back into drop shipping and this time I ran Facebook ads. And I actually broke even then. So I'm like, okay, this isn't profitable, but at least I'm seeing traction.
Okay.
I bet you if I had an established product or service, I would be
so
able
instead
to...
of just giving up and going, well, this drop shipping thing, it's a joke, I'm like, forget it. You went, let me learn from the experience, and you tweaked it.
Yeah, it's like I knew that drop shipping was a profitable business model. I just was like, what's going to be essentially the road of least resistance for me to see success in business at this point in my career, being like knowing literally nothing, right? So I'm like, well, I could do this for local businesses, or like if there was an established e-com company, I feel like I could get them results, whatever. I started doing it for local businesses. That ended up generating really good results because my first client I had actually fired me. He was a contractor and I booked him out on too many kitchen and bath remodels, like too far in advance. So he was like,
booked him, you got him too much business?
Yeah. That was my first client in lead gen, running Facebook and Instagram ads using like Zapier for like simple follow-up text and all that good stuff. But then, yeah, it progressed just doing lead gen for different industries. And then I started my own podcast years ago, and I got just talking with all these different entrepreneurs that were much further ahead than I was, which is how I learned about public relations and the power of building a brand and different marketing strategies. So, yeah, fast forward, I then pivoted into that niche because I resonated a lot more with it and seemed like there was a need from the market for that. And yeah, I've been there since, and it's been a
Okay.
fun journey. Yeah, we'll
Okay.
say
And
with
through
ups and downs.
well, and through this all though, and I think this is the part that we'll dig into through it all, and even from what you described with what you did with the drop shipping, you've taken a technical lens to it. I mean, as I'm listening to you unpack this, you've
Yeah,
looked for technical solutions to the problem, even figuring out how to use social media ads to enhance, to build your product and things like that. I mean, that's something that, again, I'm guessing you didn't go to grad school and specialize in social media marketing or anything like that. You just figured it out.
yeah, completely. Yeah, I dropped out of college actually. So I was
Okay.
going, COVID happened and everything. And even when I was going, I was kind of like, what am I doing? Like, I mean, for me, I was going to get like a business management major. Why do I need to go to college for that? I absolutely don't. Um, so yeah, yeah. But the
Path of
reality
least
is,
resistance. You went the path of least resistance. I
yeah.
like it.
Well, I was learning so much more from the podcast that where
From
I was
doing it.
interviewing these
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. Yeah, essentially interviewing them, and then on the flip end of that, just implementing it and getting feedback from the actual marketplace.
Yeah. Well, which makes sense. I mean, really, anybody in my industry, and I think most people would say practical experience of actually doing things hands down beats,
Yes.
well, I learned in theory how this should work, which I mean, you had some hard school of hard knocks right out of the gate with
Yeah.
the with the drop shipping of like, well, I've gotten all A's, I've done great, and I should be able to nail this. And you got a big F on your first paper. So that's the way it
Yeah.
goes. So, having done this PR thing, and this is where, as we were backstage and kind of leading up to this conversation, we wanted to talk about the impact generative AI has on this, because
Yeah.
obviously there's a whole business functional aspect to the work you're doing. And for those who aren't familiar with content creation, there's a lot of administration, there's a lot of stuff that happens on the back end, which I think if you look at any organization, any function, a lot of the work we do is very robotic and mechanical in nature, even though we
Yeah.
don't always see it that way. So, generative AI is a prime target for helping augment, or in many cases, replace some of that work, which is what we want to talk about today. So, as you look at that, when did you really start leaning into augmenting and specializing and leveraging generative AI to help with some of the work you were doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, about a year ago, I remember ChatGPT, like OpenAI, essentially had their big ChatGPT update, right?
Yep.
It was in, I believe, last December, and I just remember like that was the first time I really sunk. Like I did a little stuff with like Jasper and like a few other like ads before, but that was the first time I really sunk my hands into it. And at that point in our company, now we do a lot more with podcasting, which we still use
Yep.
AI in a ton of different ways, which I can dive into. But then it was a lot of like article creation and writing, getting people featured in the media. So, and we were still doing podcasting, just not as big. But I was like, wow, this can write articles pretty dang good, like, about different
And that
topics.
was only it's early. I mean, those were generation, I think it was like two or three, two and a half
Mhm.
that was coming out. So it wasn't even where it is now on four.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I just started to see, I was like, "Okay, this is totally flipping how things are done." It's essentially for a lot of roles, taking what a writer does, where they typically spend 80% of their time creating, 20% of their time editing, and flipping it to spend 20% of their time creating, through AI, and then 80% of their time editing, just going through and tweaking a few things, which makes their output much more efficient. Um, so
And at the time, were you doing, because you mentioned you ended up starting to toy with it for article creation, for getting the folks that were working with your PR firm,
Mhm.
more press visibility, things like that. Is that something you were doing already and investing a ton of that time on the writing side, or was it something you'd shied away from because of the time that went into it that was like, that's not going to be our focus area?
Yeah, it was something at that point that we were already doing. So
Okay.
it really just made things like so much quicker because we were getting ready to hire another writer, and then we're like, well, actually, like we don't have to do that right now. And that was a
Okay.
big like, whoa. And then that's when I was like, okay, what else can this do? And I'm happy to there's a whole bunch of use cases in our company for that. I want to keep it very practical. So I'm happy to dive
Yeah.
into any ones that you see fit. I know you know a little bit of the background on that. Um, but yeah, that was my first like experience with it and just seeing how it could actually solve a tangible problem that actually forwards the efficiency and growth of a business.
Well, and we'll keep unpacking different ones, but I think some of these use cases, and I love talking about kind of the human wrapper around that, because at the time, so you had writers with the company, or
Yeah.
you had writers on staff at the time.
Yes.
You saw this and went, hey, we might not need more writers. We may be able to leverage that. How did the writing staff feel about that?
It was I think like it was a mixed thing, but I think the
Okay.
biggest thing was that I kept driving home. So, and I think this comes just to like what is your culture, right? Are you guys going to be a company that whenever something new comes up, you're like, I don't really feel like it, or are you going to be like, okay, let's get uncomfortable and let's
Yeah.
dive into this and learn? Because I was being very honest with them and being like, guys, this is going nowhere. It's only going to get better. It's not going to replace your job, but if you learn how to do it, you become insanely more valuable. And the
Yes.
truth is, as it develops, I think it's actually going to replace a lot of jobs down the line. It isn't there yet. But I'm like, if you know how to work with it, you just become so much more valuable because you can 3x, 5x, depending on how good you are, your output when
Right.
you really master these tools for a specific skill. After that, it was pretty like widely accepted. There were people that were concerned about like plagiarism and things of the sort like that too. But
Yeah, you
yeah,
had to work through some of the initial things. And
yeah,
well, we won't spend a ton of time on the content creation. I mean, we can, because I think it's helpful to unpack for folks who may be in the same space who are going. And I can just say, coming from the learning industry, creating content is a big chunk of what people in L&D do. They're generating
mhm,
content. And that same use case of, oh, so this could potentially generate content on our behalf. What does that mean for me? And that feeling that you discussed in terms of the culture of, well, are we going to sit here and go, I'm just going to stick my head in the sand and hope it
mhm,
goes away, which it's not going to, as we've seen over the last
yeah,
12 months. It's clearly not going anywhere. Or you can lean in and go, well, it's here to stay. So let's get uncomfortable and figure it out. But have you seen, as you've looked at the trajectory of that from a content creation,
yeah.
I mean, you've been doing it now for 12 months with some of that staff. Are they starting
Mhm.
to adapt to it and go, you know what, this is actually like, I think some people are afraid to step into it because they're almost afraid I'm going to hate it. Have you
Yeah.
seen some of the staff go, actually now you're on the other side of it now?
Yeah, I definitely think I think we all are of the consensus that we wish it didn't exist because we think it'd be better for humanity overall if it didn't exist. I think that's our
Okay.
general thought process, but the reality is it isn't going anywhere. So it's
It's
kind
an
of like,
inevitability.
yeah, yeah, you like I think in life a lot of times you have to look at the chessboard and look at your pieces and be like, what's the best move? Not like, oh, I wish my queen was in that corner instead. You know what I mean? It's like um or like, oh, I wish they didn't have a queen on the table or that knight right there. Like it's there. So what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but really now, like, gosh, it's like I think people have found it almost cool in a way of like how much more they can do. Because for
Okay.
example, we'll have our editor after we get a client on a podcast. They like right now, for example, I'm recording this as well on my own phone. I'm going to send this over to my team. And what they're going to do is they're going to upload it to um video.ai, except it's not spelled normal like video. That's a
No, I know.
useless
I know
word.
which app you're talking about.
Yeah.
VIDYOAI. Yeah,
Yeah,
video
I
AI.
always spell it wrong. But they're gonna upload it to that, and it's just gonna help. Like after that, they'll do some normal like post production in
Yep.
like whatever tools they use. I'm not even exactly sure for the editing tools that we use, but like for the AI tools, it just helps just find all the little snippets, right? And it just makes it
Yep.
so much quicker. And now they can just take the ones they like and go edit them more in depth. So and
So
then the fun,
let's unpack that one a little bit, because again, I'm
yeah,
super familiar with this as a
yeah.
content creator as well, and I think people listening to this can benefit from this. Going, oh, that's a practical way. And the reason I say we can unpack it will be helpful is there's a number of times I've been on calls with folks where I've been sharing my screen or something, and somebody's been like, wait, what are you doing with that? And then actually
Mm,
talking them through, they start to go, oh, that's how that works. That actually
yeah,
seems really handy with this. Because similar to you, after I do a podcast, after I do something like that, when I get time to actually do the post production work, the first thing I do is what you just described as well, where it's like, okay, now I have the raw source content, but the amount of time that would go into me trying to scan a hour and 10-minute conversation and look
yeah,
for all of the really interesting highlights and clips and things like that. I got 7 kids.
yeah,
I don't got time to sit and do that. But I never just take it and then just hit publish with that stuff. It's more
yeah,
hey, here are the highlights that I can then go through and go, that one really connects with this, or this one's really great
yes,
for that. And it helps identify that stuff in really meaningful ways.
definitely. Yeah, I think like so I'll dive into the specifics of that application. And I think like the overall bigger thing of it too for me is I'm like, if we were to do things the old way, it would be more expensive because I would need to hire more team members. But the other thing is also, and this is the biggest thing, is it would be more of a headache because now there's more quality control, right? Like there's a lot
Yep.
more of we need to train more people or make sure that we do the due diligence in our hiring process to find more people that already have the skill, make sure that it's going to be a right fit from a salary standpoint, that's going to be a right fit from a culture standpoint and all these other things. And for this it's like yeah, it just really when you can take a few people and really invest in them heavily, it allows your focus to be deeper in that, which can produce more
Yeah.
results because they have the bandwidth to do so.
It's
But
interesting you bring that up because to your point, having hired a fair share of people over the years, there is often this challenge that comes with trying to find somebody with this really specialized or niche set of skills where they have experience doing
mhm,
it. And a lot of time, and sometimes you even might find the person, but then to your point, it's like, well, their salary requirements are this. And you're
yeah,
like, well, we can't do that, or it's not going to, or their
mhm,
timeline is this, or
yeah,
there's some sort of complication to it versus with AI, you almost can take a more general person who you go, this is a person whose character, integrity, work ethic, these
yeah,
things, they're fantastic. I don't necessarily need them to have all these specialized skills because I can
yeah,
teach them alongside AI. They can figure out how to navigate some of these things. So it actually allows you to invest more deeply in your people. I mean, as the more I think about it.
yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And you're also helping them become a more valuable team member, like because a lot of people I know earlier, like just in a conversation we had before this, you mentioned I think it was like 91% of people did not use an AI.
93.
93, yeah, did not.
93% of people do not use generative AI more than once a week, which was
Yeah,
staggering to me who uses it all the time.
yeah, and it's because I actually use it more than Google now for even like search terms, and I'm serious because it can even search the internet now for current events through Bing.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
well, specifically referencing ChatGPT, but yeah, so I definitely think it allows you to just like, and it's cool too, because if you have good people, they're going to want to learn. Nobody's going to just
Yes.
want to be essentially like a cog in a system if they're super talented, where they just feel unchallenged, unmotivated. But if you can, like, this AI stuff is changing so quickly. So, what I'll do is, as soon as, we have something new with AI, like in one of these applications, either we'll have the team members, and this gives them a sense of leadership and ownership as well, go and make a quick Loom video for the team. Hey guys, the rest of the people on that team, there was this update
Yeah.
with the software that we use. I toyed around with it and here's what I found. Right. Or if it's
Okay.
something that I have more ownership in, which that's, there's a few things delegated differently in the company, but then I'll make that video, to other people that
Okay.
might be doing it when I'm the one mainly doing the quality control in that sect. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, it helps solve that problem because it creates problems, but also solves problems.
Well, and you're reallocating your time. And I think this goes back to some of the fear that people have around AI of, well, if AI starts doing this stuff, then what am I going to be doing? And I mean, these are some of the things we're describing right now of things that you're doing instead. So again,
Yeah,
staying current on what the technology can do because you have that capacity that you didn't before because you were too busy scouring transcripts
yeah,
looking for the highlight clips in your world. You had people that's what they were doing. And I actually had a conversation last week with a mayor out in Washington, and we were talking practically about the fact that, in municipal government, a lot of time by government employees is spent just looking stuff up.
yeah,
Where were the meeting notes for this? What was the decision on
yeah,
this type of a thing? A huge percentage of time is spent on that. And generative AI is eliminating that. And it's very similar in the content space.
yeah, yeah. It's really true. There's a lot of it just gives you one answer, right? And then it's a lot easier to fact check that one answer in a relatively quick manner, just going on Google and searching and being like, oh yeah, there's a lot of sources that seem to say this. Of course, it's not going to be perfect. Is it better? In my opinion, 1,000%.
Yeah. Well, and to your point though, your time, instead of going back to this of how are you spending your time, which you hit
Hmm.
on this earlier on, where your writers, instead of spending 80% of the time writing and 20% editing and tweaking and
Yeah,
refining, it's flipping that upside down and going, well,
yeah,
20% of your time, let it generate the thing. Let's actually have you spend your time really crafting and honing this and making it fantastic. Similar to what you just said there in terms of even fact checking or things like that, where it's like, well, get me this information rather than spending all the time trying to find that information. Instead, you're
yeah.
going, here's the information I got. Is it the right information?
Yes, definitely. And do you want me to dive into video.ai quickly too? Because I believe I segmented a little bit away from that. I'm cool to continue, but if anyone is curious, I can briefly explain how that
Well,
works and
I
how
think it
simple
would
it
be
is.
helpful, because again, I'm familiar with it. I
Yeah,
use the tool as well. And it's less of a, hey, this is a plug for this tool, but talking about what it
definitely.
does for content, which again, I think is relevant to many professionals. Because in my opinion, more and more people are becoming content creators, whether they realize it or not. And
Yes.
so, yeah, again, let's talk about what video AI can do. Because again, going back to, people are producing video all the time. Even when you don't think you are, you might be on a Zoom call
Yeah.
and you're creating video content.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah. You can definitely use this tool with Zoom calls. Like we in our company obviously use them from podcasts because we're getting our clients booked
Yep.
on podcasts. But whatever the long form video is that you have, all you have to do is this simple. And like you said as well, I have no affiliation with this service. We just
Mhm.
use it and it's a good service. Um you simply upload the video that you want to have short form video clips that you see on Instagram Reels or TikTok or whatever it is. You upload that video and it will essentially transcribe it and use AI to find where in that video did you say interesting things? At least what do they deem might be an interesting quote unquote clip, some a
Yep.
little social media segment. And then they'll go and they'll find those sections for you and then they'll also take it a step further and do the initial editing, just like how they
Yep.
set up the clip to make sure that it's essentially formatted properly and all these different things. Of course there's errors in that, which comes to the next part, which is now really what this does is not a solution where you just click download all and you post all of them. It's
I do
actually
know people, and I've seen people do that, and it's a mistake if you do. I'll just tell you that right now, because in raw form, it's not the best approach.
Yeah. I mean, I would disagree with someone with that approach. I also commend them on their ability to take action, to just go and just
Yes.
because yeah,
Just go
but
bangers with it.
yeah, but pretty much yeah, from that point you just need to manually review it and ask yourself, does this add a unique perspective that, like, essentially to the quote unquote marketplace of content? That's one
Yep.
question that we have our editors ask themselves, is they're researched on the clients that they manage, their industries, and then they're also consuming some of that content as part of what we do with them, and they ask themselves, like, is this something I've heard 1,000 times? Is this new? Is this like, and they want to showcase the expertise and the value. So really just, for most people listening to this, it's likely going to be educational content that I would be producing. So really just asking yourself that question. If you think, oh yeah, I made a good point there, I think someone could benefit from that, then just
Yep.
going, taking that clip, downloading it, making any minor edits in the app if need be, to because it gives you automatic subtitles to the subtitles, maybe a word spelt wrong, whatever it is. And then you could go and put it into another editing application to do the final touches.
Yep.
Sometimes it's good enough just to post, but most of the time it would really benefit from another little
Yeah, I
touch
would
up.
say, and again, I think this is my general accuracy with AI. I'd say it's like 80-20.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably 80. Again, that goes back to your kind of earlier threshold. I would say about 80% of it, the work is done. And
Yeah.
then it goes back to, you might be refining the timing. You might be like, I don't like exactly where that started or where it ended. I may not like this format or whatever, but you can adjust it. But going back to, you're thinking about it specifically through the lens of, here you're working with podcasters and you're
Yeah.
helping them, do this, get additional content, or people who are on podcasts. But when I think about the corporate sector, these kinds of tools have tremendous potential. Again, whether it's, for a learning community who's, you're creating
Mm-hmm.
a lot of long form content, which
Yeah.
again, we know people often struggle with consuming long form content, or they may
Mm-hmm.
want to at some point, but they may really want to know the, like, what are the biggest takeaways from this? And it's a great way to identify where in the conversation those things are, and being able to subjugate those things out and go, here you go. But even I actually have was talking to somebody the other day. They're actually using this for big meetings. They're recording big
Yeah.
meetings, and then they're putting their meetings in the tools to be able to help identify, hey, what were the major themes from the meeting, that they can then send out post meeting and say,
Yeah.
even the timestamps that it gives, to
Yeah.
at least go, hey, here's these sections, so that they can actually annotate and help people understand what they can expect.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really smart. And I think there's even an opportunity for a lot of people, like they're talking about, let's say, internal meetings, to go record those if you're talking about something strategy wise. And of course, bleep out any relevant details that are sensitive information to a specific client, but then go and post those on social media just to showcase their team's expertise. They're likely not going to get thousands of views and like a whole bunch of like, engagement. But the thing is, when somebody's going to look at hiring your company and they do that research step, especially if you have a high ticket product or service, it helps a lot with that. We work with a lot of different clients. Some of them are a lot more corporate. Most of them are like 20 to 200 employees.
Okay.
But we've just found, yeah, the people that even just have like a little presence, typically their actual conversion rate in their acquisition process or sales process, whatever you want to call it, is higher just from that, which is part of what we try to help them with. But yeah, it's just getting out the expertise, even if you're not going to, look perfect or have a whole bunch of this stuff. It even serves as like a database for people to scroll through and be like, okay, that makes sense. They're legit.
Okay. Well, and I think this goes back to, again, the value of, and we talked a little bit about this backstage, but, in the attention economy, in an economy where you're now competing against artificial intelligence, you're competing against a
Mhm.
lot of things, the need to set yourself apart. And that doesn't mean you have to sit and make yourself look like you're greater than everything, but
Yeah.
more so, hey, here's the distinct perspective I bring. There's
Yeah.
a lot of ways you can do this. And going back to the point of, as we talk about some of these things, a lot of this work we just described, I think this is one of the things that I find most helpful with AI, is work that everyone always said, wouldn't it be nice if we could do this, but we don't have time or capacity to. So
Mhm.
given the example of like a really important strategy meeting where maybe you're taking some clips from that to either reshare with people of like, here's some of the highlights, or, using for PR and branding type stuff.
Yeah.
2 years ago, somebody might have had that idea like, hey, what if we did that? And everybody just kind of goes, yeah, but like, who's going to sit and record this meeting and then go, like,
Yeah.
what are we going to hire
Yeah.
somebody to transcribe it and then go review this? Like, who
Yep.
has time to sit around and do this kind of stuff? So it's actually creating new opportunity, which I think is really encouraging for people who may
Yeah.
go, well, I'm just worried it's going to take away my work. It's like, there are lots of ideas that I have that I haven't had opportunity to go, that AI is actually now creating that opportunity.
It's funny you say that because for a while, our core services were simply getting people in media, typically online media, and getting people on podcasts. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until the recent rise of AI that we started incorporating from podcast features, which is really why we focused in on that, because long form video, to all the reasons we're talking about, holds a lot of benefits. We were able to very efficiently and effectively get those social media clips, right? Instead of
Yep.
because some people have it as their core service, and there's a reason for that. It's complex. It's not so
It
easy.
is.
But because now you bring in AI, that just added, like, we're like, oh my gosh, we can actually scale this now and have it with the quality that we're proud to put our stamp on, rather than just saying we offer short form videos. And then the other part of that too is we're like, man, it would be awesome to go through a podcast recording and write, a media article and get that article placed based off what they said in the interview. But to your point, it's like, yeah, but then the writer has to listen to like an hour-long thing each time just to write an article, and then they have to re-listen, and like they're falling asleep half the time. So it's like, okay,
Right, because you're trying to get them to pay attention to a long form conversation for a really long time versus taking the transcript, outputting
yeah,
it, popping it into Chat GPT and saying, what are the most important themes
yeah,
that came out of here, that then a writer can go, oh, like, and that's where they are. And I'm just going to zone in on that
yeah.
and then blow that into something different.
Yeah. Well, we even take it a step further too. We literally, like, the prompt we use, I can't remember the exact thing, of course, but I know it starts with write a newsworthy PR article for a third party business blog, which is how we word it, even though it's not exactly
Yep.
what it is, about like from this recent podcast interview with this person from this company. Here's a little bit of their background, and here's the transcript, and make this, 800 words, right? And now it's not just spewing some like, oh, this is what I think about whatever the topic
Right.
is.
It's not just
It's
grabbing
using,
the general internet garbage and just
yes,
trying to
yes,
summarize that into whatever. It's actually taking the content, which I do this with every single one of my conversations,
yeah,
because there's a lot of good information in it that I want to pull out of it, instead of just the generic internet junk you would find across, a sea of stuff.
most definitely. Yeah, that's how I feel about, and that's what I think is great about the long form video is you're capturing all the data that you need for content. And
Right.
then you can just put that transcript with the prompt into AI like ChatGPT and get 80% of the way there, and then
Yep.
spend the 20% of time editing it.
Well, and the point that we just hit home with this is, it's creating new, I mean, and you've seen this
Hmm.
firsthand with your organization. It's creating new opportunity that didn't exist before. And I think this is
Yeah.
one of the biggest things that I continue trying to highlight in conversations to combat some of the fear mongering I see, which is like, AI is coming for your job, like you're not going to have anything to do, it's going to, just destroy. And
Hmm.
it's like, well, my experience continues to be, the more people I talk to who are leaning into this, it's creating new opportunity where opportunity either didn't exist, or people saw the opportunity but said, we don't have capacity to do it, or the return on what
Yeah.
capacity we would have to invest in it, it just wasn't there. And now
Yeah.
that value prop has flipped.
Yeah, it's true. And we can go further into it if you'd like, because I even thought of another scenario like this. Like, we used to not personalize our messages when we're doing outreach to different hosts or
Okay.
whatever it is. But
Yeah.
now, because of AI, we personalize that, and we have somebody that needs to check the personalizations. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because obviously we don't just do it and boom, send automatically. I think for some industries that honestly could work if you're doing mass scale, but when you're trying to build the relationships with people, you don't want to have someone read your message and go, what? you know?
Yeah.
So
Hello, blank. Good.
yeah.
What? And you're like, yeah, this is just some generic spam.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it helps us essentially in that regard build relationships at scale in a more efficient manner. But because we're implementing that now, we have someone coming in that needs to make sure that the quality is there with that, and they can do a
Right.
lot of those messages. But yeah.
Yeah, but it's up well, in an area that I see this happen a lot on the corporate side is, again, personalization. To me, the age of personalization is what AI is really bringing in, because
Hmm.
personalization historically has not been scalable. It's
Yeah.
always been the challenge to personalizing is,
Hmm.
well, we would love to be more, personalized for each person. We just don't have time to do that. So we have to cast the widest net. And with AI, that's not the case. I even think of, in a corporate space, I work with a lot of folks who, you know, even emails or, when they do messages out or they create content, it's like, well, we have to create the content. I just think back to my days when I ran big global organizations where you would
Hmm.
go, we can only create this once because we don't have time to translate it. We don't have time to localize it. We don't have time to do those things. And for us to try and either hire staff or find people in that region to be able to personalize this to their culture, their language, we just can't do it. Well, now going back to your earlier point, with a well crafted prompt, you can literally say, here's what I have. I now
Hmm.
need you to make a version of this for this audience in this group with these specific needs that may be more focused on this. And within seconds can get that same product, which before it was work that couldn't happen that now
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even as simply if it's one specific type of person too that you're personalizing for, finding a profile of theirs online, social media, maybe it's their own website, whatever, just copy and pasting the text on it. It doesn't have to be pretty formatting at all. You just throw it in there as, hey, here's some more information on the person that I'm reaching out to. Feel free to use anything that you see fit to personalize this message, whatever. And now it's
Right.
like, whoa, it sticks out from what you just said, which is what most people do, which is the mass, just one universal message, which obviously it works. But the question is, does it work? It's not, does it work or doesn't? It's how well does it work and how can it be
Right.
improved? You know?
Which goes back to what we talked about from the very beginning, that a lot of this is about finding the greatest benefit for your investment, getting the biggest return on whatever time or energy you're spending into things, which, yeah, can you send a generic one size fits all? And again, this could be in your industry, this could be in any industry where you're trying to reach someone. Could you do that? Yeah. And the funnel might
Mhm.
be, see how big my camera is. It could be like this big and then it goes down to this big. But
Yeah.
if you could open that funnel up and say, well, now instead of it going from 100 to one return, if I can go from 100 to 30 with
Yeah.
no more additional work, it just to me seems like, why wouldn't you take those steps?
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay. So what other things, as you continue exploring this, I think another one is, as people look at some of this, there can be a little bit of concern around, well, how much information, do we put out there, or where do we even get started with it? As you look at some of your operational pieces, we talked through some of the things you can do with content, but then there's also the operations component. And I'm curious
Yeah.
if there's ways you're looking at artificial intelligence for streamlining, like, operational internal processes, things like that.
Yeah. So this is actually really exciting, and I appreciate you asking because I think that this is where, for most businesses, the biggest and in certain ways easiest opportunity to guarantee that AI is going to positively impact their organization lies.
Okay.
Um, and the reason why I think that, we've done it in multiple different areas of the business, which I can kind of break down so that way, everyone has tangible examples and they can connect what that actually looks like. But B, it's like if you're working in a remote environment, or not even if it's in person, but you're just doing a lot online for your work, just that, like, I think we assume that humans need to do the things that they're currently doing, but
Yes.
I would really
It's a
ask
really
that
bad
question
assumption a
deeper.
lot of people make, that everything
Yeah,
people are doing has to be done.
yeah, it's like A, it has to be done, and B, it has to be done by a human, right?
Yes.
And what I mean by that is ultimately, like you brought up earlier, it's not going to be like in 99% of scenarios where AI currently is, oh, well, we're just eradicating the human here. But it is now, how can we essentially empower our team with AI to go and 2x their output
Yeah.
operationally, to go and increase their efficiency by 30% in this department, whatever it is. And there's really simple ways to do this. I think there's two primary ways that we've done it, and I'm happy to dive into both.
Yeah.
And I think any company that again works online can do. The first one is that OpenAI, also, which is the company that owns ChatGPT,
Yep.
had an update recently, and that update introduced something called GPTs for their premium users.
Yeah.
It's only $20 a month. If you think it's expensive, it isn't. Um,
You pay
and
more than that for Netflix, with Netflix's rates flying up.
yeah, it's like, I'm like, if you just like knew how your team could leverage this, it's worth every cent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so you, with GPTs, what you can essentially do is create a version of Chat GPT that either has certain parameters, or certain parameters that they can work within, right? Because maybe you're like, I just don't want them to, talk about these topics, or it's a
Yep.
problem that they, I'm getting this response when I use normal Chat GPT, and I shouldn't be getting that. You can set those parameters so those oopsie daisies are a lot less likely to happen. Not perfect, but less
Yep.
likely. And then the other thing you can do is you can train it on specific data or specific rules as well. So, how do you, let's say, if you made one on email copy, right? Let's say that you write a lot of email copy for your business. You can make a GPT go and analyze, let's say you're writing email copy for your clients, you do cold email for them, hypothetically.
Okay.
Okay, well, go and take your top 10 best performing, campaigns, and go and upload those essentially into the GPT.
As source content, saying
Yes,
these are the things that it should, this is what good look should look like.
exactly. And you can even take it a step further and put it into normal Chat GPT to help you with creating the GPT. And what I mean by that is you can upload those 10 to Chat GPT all at once, label them 1, 2, 3, 4, give it the context. This is emails that I used at my business to help book meetings for my clients. What I want you to do is I want you to help me make a GPT that can replicate this output consistently with AI. What I
Yep.
want to know is, how would you describe these messages, these emails? How would you describe these emails? They'll say, oh, they're pretty short. You use a lot of one sentence, paragraphs. You're not writing a whole huge chunk of text. They're going to say these things, except in a much smoother sounding way than I would communicate it.
Yeah.
Um, and you can also ask it like, okay, thank you for providing that. What questions would you need to ask a client in order to get all the information you would need to write an email like this? Right. And what
Okay.
that does too is it will tell you and say, awesome, how can I make my GPT that I'm building? How can I make essentially them collect this information as well? And it will tell you what to put into the prompts. And then you can go and test the GPT. And for people that are like, this is kind of confusing, there's two things here. Everyone knows how to use Chat GPT. All that GPT is it's a little button you click, and it has a little box where you can type in essentially text or
Yeah, you're
upload
basically
files.
no code. You're no code programming
Yes.
your own custom build of
Mhm.
Chat GPT around a very specific, well, it can be general or it can be very specific task. You're like, we want to take
Yeah.
all the power of Chat GPT, but we want to, and this goes back to, I had a conversation with Kevin Saras a while back, and we were talking about the fact that the old days of AI were you had to program all the possible things
Yeah.
AI could do. You were actually going like, well, we need to think about this. And if anybody's ever built one of these things, the triage just goes nuts real quick.
Mhm.
And now we have the reverse. With generative AI, it actually reversed that, where now instead it's like, well, it can basically do anything. So you actually have to focus it and go, I actually need you to get very specific on this kind of thing. And these are the parameters we need you to fit. So it's actually a reversal, but that's
Yeah.
essentially what we're talking about with a GPT. When you train a GPT with OpenAI's thing, is you're actually taking the power of chat GPT and focusing it on a very specific task, process, whatever it is, and then giving it all the parameters to do it well.
Yeah. And when you're training a GPT, it's, in my opinion, what is closest to replicating yourself for the amount of time and energy that you actually put into it. So it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to say exactly what you would say. But if you write LinkedIn posts and you've been killing it on LinkedIn, you can upload all your posts and, create a GPT that essentially helps you. Then you can talk, voice type into it. Hey, I had this idea that I want to make a piece of content about. Last week, I implemented this in my business. Here's been the result, and here was the process. Boom, go. And since it's already programmed to write LinkedIn posts, it will then, it takes, because you have to sit there and you have to think, okay, how am I going to make this engaging, whatever. And it can go and do 80% of that. Of course, like we said before, it's not going to be perfect, but it just saves you so much time and energy. So it starts like for those little tasks that you're still doing, and even ones that your team is doing, they can, the same way that it can benefit you, it can benefit your team members. You just need to be aware of how they can leverage it and help them leverage it, or even set up a GPT for them and help train them and show them how you made it. Record yourself on Loom as you do it and talk through the process so they can
Yeah.
see it.
Well, and what's interesting about this, because while folks listening may think, may be coming to the conclusion that this is very focused on content creation, which in
Mhm.
some ways it is. But I think what people don't always think about is a lot of the work we do is actually content creation. Even if you don't think of yourself as a content creator, in the business world, if you're putting together a strategy deck, I mean, what is that? It's content.
Yeah.
You're coming up with content based on what you're trying to do, that yes, you may use it for, a presentation for this and that, but at the end of the day, what we're producing is content that we then repurpose. And again, from a strategy standpoint, I have a GPT that is trained on a ton of stuff that I keep private, but it's more my strategic thought partner that I've trained on the way I think, the way I articulate things, the
Yeah.
way I pull things together, and not so that I can just hit the easy button, but so that when I'm stuck or I want to bounce an idea around, whether it's a LinkedIn post, whether it's just something where I'm thinking through how I might want to go about this, it's thinking similar to me. But to your point, it's not perfect, and how much time you
Yeah.
put into it will really determine how effective it is.
Definitely. And to your point that you brought up too about content creation, and like how a lot of this, I've been giving a lot of examples of that, and there's been other talk around content. I think like to balance that with an example of a GPT that we specifically use for our operations solely, so people can start to kind of like connect the dots and see different ideas of how maybe they could use it. For us, we're writing a lot of pitches for clients because we're pitching them to media outlets, we're pitching them to podcast hosts,
Okay.
whatever it is, right? Where they're publicists. So obviously, writing the pitch is something that is very, very important, especially
Yep.
when someone doesn't have a known brand. So we analyzed our best pitches and trained a GPT on that.
Okay.
So that way on the back end, and the cool thing is now after the onboarding call, the GPTs ask like, okay, please give me this information on the client, right? Boom, we type in the information. It comes up with the draft pitch trained on our standards that I would go and train a team member on. I went and I trained a GPT on it. And now our team members, when they use that, they're just like, oh, this is cool. They can bounce their ideas off of it. They can have it create different versions. Could you make one that's also has humor in it? Right.
Yeah.
And it's using all that specific data from that client and the data that we've already like figured out works for pitches. And I think that for
Right.
GPT specifically is an example.
Well, and this goes back to that, reinforces the point that I was making, is where a lot of
Mhm.
people may not think they're in the content creation business, but a lot of the work we do at work is
Yeah.
creating content. I mean, a pitch email or a pitch, it's content at the end, because it's like, well, what do? You're creating a thing, but it's the same thing for a lot of the work that people are doing, whether it's, brainstorming a financial model for this and that, whether it's thinking through what are the strategic priorities for our group in 2024 and beyond. Well, ultimately at the end of the day, you are creating things, which generative AI is really powerful for using.
Yeah, most definitely.
So I'm curious your take on this, because some of the pushback that I've seen, and I think there's some healthy reason to be concerned about it, is there is, some concern about, well, where does all this information go? And what
Hmm.
happens to all this stuff that, essentially, and if you talk to the doomsday folks, they're like, you're training the very thing that's going to come completely torpedo you. So I'm
Yeah.
actually curious, when you think about that, what's your initial reaction?
When you say where does everything go, what more specifically do you mean, to make sure I
So,
answer
okay.
properly?
So as an example, right? Let's say your pitch
Hmm.
GPT that you use to write your
Yeah.
pitch emails. You are now sharing all of the intellectual property of the empathy firm with this GPT on, hey, here is all the best stuff that we've ever done.
Yeah.
We're teaching you how to do this. We're giving you all this information. Ultimately, yes, for the benefit that you're going to help us create more of that. But what happens, and I think this is some of the legitimate concern people have with AI, is some of that used to be locked in our heads. And so it added an
Yeah.
inherent value to people that they went, well, I'm good at this.
Yeah.
Now I'm just giving all this away to who?
Yeah. Well, a few things on that. One, so I think that's a really great question. And I think a lot of people even don't consider that. But essentially, yeah, I know that there are people that are worried about, is my competitive moat being bridged over by AI, essentially? And if I use
Yeah.
it, am I also, draining my moat?
Yep.
I have some stronger opinions on this. So I think that the thing is, it's like okay, first off, it depends is the first one. It depends on the company,
Yeah.
right? I know Samsung got in, like, they had a whole thing a while ago where, like, employees were using, and they leaked a whole bunch of proprietary code that probably had millions of dollars worth of development on. That's a
Yep.
different scenario. You got to know what your
You
business's
got to
real
know the
strengths
boundary
are.
lines. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I say this, take the context of your own business and apply it. But, like, for us, it's like the stuff is okay. For a lot of service-based businesses, you're going to hurt yourself a lot more by playing on defense and not wanting to share a secret than you will if you were to flip it and plan offense and be like, okay, well, maybe this AI will learn and get better and help my competitors. But the reality is, if I'm going in on this strong and it's helping our team, and we just continue that culture and that mindset, that's going to help us way more in the long run. And then if one of our competitors gives us something, awesome, now we're better, whatever it is. Because I think in service-based businesses, implementation is more than half the battle. So let's, like, if you build something that helps with implementation, don't shy away from that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And the other part of it too, and this is why we're big on branding and whatnot, is because brand is a competitive moat. When a service becomes essentially, let's say, commoditized, let's say AI helps commoditize a service because it's like, oh, well, now everyone kind of has access to do this thing at a high level, which inherently you have to think about as well, because marketers ruin everything. The market isn't just going to let everything be the same and be cool with it. So you're always going to have to
No.
innovate. And if you're the source, then it's dependent on you for innovation. So remember
Yeah.
that as well, because, like, if you're always at the beginning, like, oh, we're doing this, we're doing that, and you build a culture around that, well, now, you don't have to worry so much about that biting you in the butt. But yeah, if you build your brand too, then even if the service itself is more commoditized, you and your business are not, because people are viewing you for information that somebody else might know, but they just don't see. Plus, it's just like if you go to a clothing store and you see a white shirt that says Adidas versus a white shirt with a logo you've never seen before. They're the exact same thing, but you just trust Adidas because you're familiar with it and you know what to expect.
Yeah. It's, well, and that's where I was curious your take on this, because I've seen all aspects of the spectrum in responses to it. And
Mhm.
to me, it's indicative of operating out of an abundance versus a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
And kind of to your point of, there's more to it. And I think this just goes back to, yes, you need to exercise practical caution. You- If you're loading your company's financials that haven't
Yeah.
even hit the street yet in AI, that is a huge mistake. And you shouldn't be going,
Yeah.
hey, here's our financial projections for next year that we're just modeling right now. Can you help us? Not the best use of
Mhm.
artificial intelligence, not only because it's not necessarily great at math, but again, you're talking about key details about your organization that you wouldn't want to share. But a
Yeah.
lot of this other stuff, I mean, I've been asked that in the past where I'm very open with a lot of my thoughts, my feelings, my, reactions to technology and the landscape of things. And I've been told, you shouldn't be so open with that. You should keep that behind lock and key because people
Mhm.
are going to take your ideas and they're going to do that. And my attitude has always been, so be it. I mean, if that's
Yeah.
what they're going to do, that's what they're going to do. And two, my attitude and my perspective changes. And again, it pushes you to stay ahead of the curve. If you
Mhm.
make a decision based on something I said 2 weeks ago, you're operating out of outdated intel, you know,
Yeah.
because you have to almost stay ahead of the game. And that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like everyone obviously is different. Like for me as well, and this is nothing related to business, but it's also everything related to business, which is that like for me, I'm a strong believer in God. And I'm just like, I used to be so anxious in business. And now I'm just like, dude, if someone takes something, whatever, like everything's gonna
Yeah.
happen the exact way it's supposed to. So I really think a big part of that too is just the mindset towards it, like you bring up about abundance or scarcity, and really just
Yeah.
like, and it also I challenge you, if that one or two pieces of critical information in your service-based business or whatever it is leaked and that's detrimental to your business, maybe take some time and really innovate on that model, right? How can you
Yeah.
ask yourself, how can I build my competitive moat while still building my service in a way that it's scalable? You know?
Well, because that actually can be a big vulnerability when you really
Yeah,
think, and I think that's how you see some of some big giants have been taken down because they built an organization around one or two core pillars that it's like we're the ones who own this, and when somebody comes and knocks those pillars out from underneath them, the
yeah,
whole house just comes crumbling down. But something else, and I think this goes back to the whole conversation around AI in general, is there is a human relational component to so many different things. And going back
mhm,
to, even in the service business, even in the product business, oftentimes there's a relational component to
yeah,
why you are doing that work or why you're choosing this person over that person. And that isn't in your SOPs or in your this and that. Like that's
yeah,
not where that comes out. I think you brought it up earlier where a lot of the details come out in the execution.
yes, yes. I believe that ideas are they're cool, they're pretty, they're nice, but at the end of the day, I could have an idea on an AI that could run $1 trillion company, but it's like, how am I going to execute that? You know?
Right.
And to your point that you're bringing up with there being things that people don't trust AI the same way they trust humans.
They
Um,
don't.
yeah. So it's to your point that you're saying a competitive advantage is you, right? Which is why I talk about brand because it's an amplified version of you, relationship building at scale. But it's like just yeah, look. It also, yeah, gosh, it really depends on where you're trying to go to and what your goals are
Yeah.
for how to go about that. But I think it's a great perspective for it, and a
Well, and,
great
and
reminder.
everything we've set up to this point is it's about thinking critically, which I think if anything in the AI age, we need to be doing a lot more of. I think
Yeah,
that's the competitive advantage is doing more of this critical thinking about things. And so should you do things in AI? Well, think critically about what are the
yeah,
implications and why and all these other things. But going back to, I'll tie in 2 points. You brought up the your belief in God, and so I'll tie it to some wisdom from Solomon, where
mm,
sometimes you see people talk about, I'm so worried about people finding out the secret sauce or this information or whatever. And I think back to Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun exists.
mm-hmm,
That's been my experience. That's some of the wisdom I've seen over the years is even I look at some of the new things that are happening in AI, it's new, but it's not really new. It's history
Yeah.
on, it's rhyming. There's new things that are
Mhm.
coming, but there's a lot of consistency that I continue seeing in this. And so again, the fear of leaning into the change, doing things differently, be out of a fear of what you have today, you may actually be doing that to your detriment.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And yeah, I think this is honestly, I think one thing that I've really enjoyed about our conversation today that relates to that point is people are really drawn to statements on social media that are very black or white, right? It's very
Yes.
yes, 100% this or no, never that. But the
AI is
reality
great or it's going to destroy the world. That's where, all the attention goes.
for sure, and you can break it down into subtopics of whatever we're talking about, and you'll find that people like polarizing opinions. It's
Yes.
not necessarily that they like it, it's that they react to them.
Yes.
And the thing is though, what I like about stuff like this is I feel like if your intent is to genuinely learn and get better, I think stuff like this is really useful because we covered a
Yes.
lot of different topics where we bring up it's very situational. And I think
Very
that's a
situational.
big component that people get confused on. Oh, this person said never this person said always that. But it's like that person doesn't know your business, they don't know you, they don't know your strengths. And I feel like entrepreneurship, a big percentage of it is self-awareness. And yeah, so it's really self-awareness for that, but then also the broader scheme of that, let's say you're in a C-level position, self-awareness of your company and your team, right? Like what are your
Yeah.
guys' strengths and weaknesses? And where can AI just slide in and how much of AI should be involved at this current stage to really make
Right.
the impact that you guys are looking to have?
Well, and on that topic, I just think about some of this where as a leader, for leaders who are listening to this, thinking about this, you do have to, there's so much nuance to this. And I will just say, I was in a conversation with somebody recently who was asking me about building a brand or whatever. And I said, well, do you want to be popular or do you want to influence people to think differently and more critically? Because if you want to be
Mhm.
popular, there's one way to do that. Go
Yeah,
say the most contrarian statements on either side of things and, cater to a specific audience, or you can challenge people to really think deeply about it. But you
yeah,
think about a leader right now with all the economic uncertainties, so many companies going through things, you may need to nuance how you approach this with your team because you may come in, you have to recognize that, hey, if you just went through a major downsizing, probably not the time to just come in and talk about how you're going to automate all of the work in the teams. You got to read the room and go, is
yeah,
this the best
yeah,
time to be telling everyone AI is going to do 80% of the work we're doing today? Probably not. And that's probably not the messaging you want to use. But does that
yeah.
mean you say, well, because of that, we're just going to stay away from it? No. Let's figure out how we have that conversation, how we push people forward while meeting them where we are. And I think that's where the human component will always be critical, regardless of how advanced AI gets.
No, I agree because yeah, you can even have that conversation with AI, give it all the context. It would probably give you the same conclusion that you would come to, but the reality is you still have to be the one that makes the decision.
Yeah.
And
And
if you're
going
bad
back
at
to
making,
people's trust, going back to
yeah,
people's trust, people don't trust AI. So you will ultimately be the one accountable for it. It's one of my biggest
yeah,
concerns as I see people leaning on AI is they're letting AI make decisions, not recognizing you're the one who will be accountable for the decisions it made. And are you
yeah,
comfortable with that accountability?
yeah, definitely. There has to be that level of human review. Otherwise, it's a lot of if you trust it too blindly, you'll be led blind, is maybe a good way to
Yeah.
put it. Yeah.
I like it. Well, we'll come into the home strip, but one funny version because we did talk about GPTs that I would just say,
Yeah.
I've seen this start to spin up. I've seen people starting to create GPTs with plans to monetize it as, now you can get my advice or I've trained this to basically be me. So get all the expertise of me at a
Yeah.
fraction of the cost. And maybe some people will pull that off. But again, going back to that accountability, I would be very careful how you think about things because I
Yeah.
anticipate we're going to see a day in the not too far future where people are getting sued over decisions made by AI, and people are going, well, the AI made the decision. And you're like, well, but who trained the AI type of a thing?
Yeah.
It's going to be
Yeah.
interesting.
That's the really tricky thing is like, if you release a product, let's just say it's a course, right? And let's say it's a course that the consensus on it is that it is not a good course. That's going to hurt your reputation, right? But you can look at exactly what happened and you can have an opportunity to learn from that, right? And be like, okay, here's why most people think it's a bad course, whatever. With AI, yeah, you can have that, but you can't really see all the different outputs that it's having, you know?
No.
So, and it could be great 99% of the time, but okay, let's scale 99% to 100,000 people. Let's say if they're using that daily, right? Okay, well, now you have 1,000 people daily that are, getting incorrect or bad information from whatever it is. So, but, and a course, what the course is saying. AI, you're not exactly sure what that 1% is with the
Oh, yeah.
very specific questions, So it's definitely
Right.
something to be mindful of. And honestly, like, I don't even know what the solution for that is. I'd always think like you have to very carefully make an offer to the marketplace, because yeah, you don't want to just make a lot of money and then have these issues come up. And then B, yeah, just set proper expectations with someone, if
Yep.
you are going to do that, and make sure you're legally protected. Those expectations are set to let people know this is not you. There are going to be mistakes, but even like you said, I'd be curious to know, like, in the way it's marketed and how it's said, where the legal line is drawn, for
Yeah.
what somebody would or would not be liable for. Um,
It's going to be really interesting to watch over the next few years as more and more things. And again, AI's capability to seem and behave like a human while still not being human.
yeah,
AI you can't put AI in jail. You can't hold it
yeah,
accountable for what it does. And so it's like, well, so then what does that legal and accountability structure look like? And how do we navigate? It's going to be interesting. I think we've seen so much change over the last 12 months, but we're just on the precipice as far as I'm concerned with some of this stuff.
yeah. Well, to that point as well, and what I'll say on that is, I think like a lot of people, they're like, there's a lot of focus on a lot of different things happening in the world.
Yes.
Um, And honestly, like, it's not like you or me necessarily focusing on it is going to help the overall goal, as much, unfortunately. But of course, you can still make a difference. Anybody that takes action towards something is making a difference. But I do, and I wrote this actually as a paper when I was in high school. We had to write what we thought was our biggest threat to humanity, and I wrote that it was AI. I think, you know, of course, like we talked about, it's great. And the reality is nobody actually knows what's going to happen. And you can get a lot of views from having a really strong opinion. But it's, I think humans are amazing, right? Humans have spirits, we have souls, we have our bodies. It's beautiful. Um, our intelligence, I don't think, is as special as people think it is.
I would
Um,
agree. And I think that's probably been one of the masks that's been peeled off in the last
mhm.
12 months that's been a little horrifying for people was we thought that was what really made us special. And suddenly it's like, well, maybe not quite as much as we thought.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like our brains created this thing that now has the potential to outgrow our brains.
Right.
Um, and I actually think it most likely will. I hope I'm wrong. And I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know if it's going to be the big brother that we always wish we, had and loved. And I love my brother, for the record. He's amazing. But just meaning like, they're amazing to us. They make our life easy. Or if, they just want to have a bunch of people zoos.
Yeah.
But, and who knows, is the reality. So I just, focus on what you can control,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think I wrote a Substack about this recently where there is a collective and individual responsibility we all have in shaping this future. And as a dad
Yeah.
of 7, I pay a lot of attention to it because the implications and
Yeah.
the decisions we make today are going to affect not just my kids, but their kids and the generation after
Definitely.
that. And we have a bad habit of only thinking next quarter or next year and not necessarily thinking in terms of decades or generations and things like that. And so I think we each have a responsibility as we think about it in our everyday life and all that. So hopefully, I like that we ended on a more philosophical kind of bigger picture thing. It was fun to go from, hey, here's how to train a GPT to actually
Yeah.
streamline and optimize your thing, all the way to what does this actually mean in terms of the state of humanity. So it's a good podcast when you span that kind of spectrum in an hour.
Yeah, most definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Gavin, for joining me and having this conversation. I know it's been a long time coming, and I appreciate having gotten to know you through this whole experience. And hopefully, everybody can think a little bit differently and potentially have some practical applications with what they can do with AI. So, thanks so much, Gavin.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. It was really fun talking over the time that we had.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And we will be back next week. I hope you have a great rest of your week and a great weekend. See you on the other side.